Welcome to another episode of We Don't Die. I'm your host, Sandra Champlain, author of the international best-selling book called We Don't Die, A Skeptic's Discovery of Life After Death. Today we are welcoming back Dr. Mark Pitstick, who was our guest way back on episode 151 of the show, which was over 2 years ago. Dr. Mark is the director and one of the co-founders of the SoulPhone Foundation. He has over 45 years experience and training in hospitals, pastoral counseling settings, mental health centers, and private practice. He is the author of several books, including Greater Reality Living, co-written with Dr. Gary Schwartz, Radiant Wellness, The 11 Questions, and Soul Proof, Compelling Evidence That No One Really Dies. Mark is the creator of the documentary film about the afterlife called Soul Proof, and has created 9 audio products that use hypnosis, breathwork, and guided imagery. The audios are fascinating. Topics like pre-birth planning, past life regression, heal and transform your suffering, and more. He's a frequent media guest, and Dr. Mark has even hosted 2 radio shows, Soulutions and Ask the Soul Doctors. Along with directing the SoulPhone Foundation, Mark is a board member for the bereaved parents group that we love so much here on We Don't Die Radio called helpingparentsheal.org. You can find out more on the websites soulproof.com, soulphone.org, and greaterrealityliving.com. Dr. Mark Pitstick, welcome back to We Don't Die Radio.
Thank you, Sandra. It's a pleasure.
It's hard to believe it's been a couple of years since we did an interview, but here we are. So really great to hear your voice again.
Thank you. Vice versa. You know that we have a mutual admiration society, definitely.
We sure do. We sure do. We saw each other last year at the Afterlife Symposium, and we've kept in touch a little via email. So here we are catching up. But Mark, because a lot of people are new to the show listening, and you were way back on episode 151. I'm wondering if you could give us a recap a little bit about who you are, your past, and talk a little bit about Soul Proof before we catch up on what's happened in the last couple of years.
Sure. How I got involved in all this, I think I was born to do it. I think it was my mission. Some evidence for that. When I was 6 years old, my parents were showing me a beautiful sunset, and I told them it reminded me of God. And they only told me that 20 years later when I was in theology school. And over the years, I've had 4 different mediums or people who could see energy tell me that I'm not the usual kind of soul that comes to a place like Earth and have these great teaching missions. Well, I can believe it because throughout my life, I felt like a stranger in a strange land. I actually had to learn how to fit in and be a good human. I would be watching football when I was 12 years old, for example, with my grandpa and uncles and dad and so on, and be thinking, gosh, if we just took a percentage of the money and time and energy to put on this game to feed the poor, think how what advancements we would make. So
wow.
Not your usual little guy. Started working in hospitals when I was 19 as a respiratory therapist, as I worked my way through pre-med, theology, clinical psych, etc., and was around lots of death and dying, and quickly was trained to do resuscitative procedures, lung intubation, arterial blood gas punctures, etc. So by age 20 was almost every weekend around one or more people as they died, including little children. And it drove me to my knees. My Lutheran upbringing, taught me that God was all-knowing, all-loving, all-caring. And so it took me a long time to figure out how that can be true, and yet all the suffering that we see going on about us. Fast forward 30 some years, marriage and kids and holistic practice, etc., life happening. And my book, Soul Proof, the documentary film, met Dr. Schwartz through started by Alexander and Audette. And Dr. Schwartz and I obviously were kindred spirits. very clear that we had a similar mission. And he asked me to start working with him in 2016 to be the spokesperson for the SoulPhone project, because he's so immersed in the research and development.
You bring up Dr. Gary Schwartz. I have seen him just a couple of times speak. Do you want to just talk a little bit about who he is and how you guys got connected?
Sure. He's, first of all, he had 2 near-death experiences when he was a little child, one at age 1 and one at age 8. And he never forgot them. He had the typical, the white light, the deep peace. It was the most love that he had ever felt in his life. It was curious for him because he was brought up in a atheistic Jewish family, and it was all science. His dad went to Columbia, a chemist, so it was all ashes to ashes, dust to dust. And that's pretty much what he believed as he marched through the top schools, Cornell, master's and PhD at Harvard, professor at Harvard, tenured professor at Yale. Excuse me, a lot of people don't know, but Dr. Schwartz has been instrumental in huge projects over the years. He was one of a handful of people who founded behavioral medicine in the 70s.
I had no idea.
Yeah, that alone is huge. Yeah, I know. It seems like every couple of months I find out something new about it. Oh, yes, I was involved in the pioneering of this field. And I'm like, anyway, he's the most amazing genius, but also caring, curious. He's just an incredible person. We have become soul brothers. In fact, he made me promise that we will continue to work together after we pass on. So I guess we have to.
There's no choice. You have no choice. Of course you will.
Yeah, he's 75 years old, and he went to the University of Arizona in 1998 so that he could start doing even more cutting edge research, and in this case, looking at the survival of consciousness. Yale and Harvard are wonderful institutions, but more on the conservative side, and University of Arizona being more liberal. And he started that research with mediums, about 20 he knew from experience. In fact, he even took courses to find out how some mediums cheat or, just are very mediocre. But he was convinced that at least some mediums had verifiable abilities. And as described in his book, The Afterlife Experiments, did double, even triple blind studies, totally controlled research with people like John Edward and George Anderson and others, and found that indeed some of them had very verifiable abilities, hit rates around 86, 90% versus 26% by the control group. So that piqued his curiosity, and he, during that time, launched the dream of creating technology to allow spirit communication. And he was aware of EVP and ITC and various approaches that may or may not work, may or may not be intelligible. He wanted, excuse me, just 1 second.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted to create technology as reliable as a cell phone that was worked 99% of the time, clearly, very clear, whether it was audio or video, etc., and set out about that. 10 of the top mediums, and Suzanne Giesman, Suzanne Wilson, and others that people would know, have started working with him, and they would independently come up with information. They would just they're saying, Albert Einstein keeps coming to me and saying, I'm supposed to contact you, Dr. Schwartz, and pass on this bit of information. And it's such a wonderful story, because sometimes these are highly technical terms, electrical engineering terms, for example, and the medium will say, I don't even know if this is a word, but I'm supposed to pass it on you. And Gary will say, it's exactly what I need to hear right now. I was stuck, and that's my sign. And especially when this kind of information came through independently by multiple mediums identically, it was a big help. So I say Dr. Schwartz gets his information from four sources. First of all, his amazing genius mind. Secondly, from these evidential mediums. Third, from his earthly team, electrical engineers, software specialists, optical physicists, and others. Being a senior professor at the University of Arizona, he is able to use grad students. I met some of them, especially from India and China. They are just such geniuses. And then fourth, what we call the A-team, a group of, quote, deceased luminaries, what we call post-material luminaries, who have been helping him. And I named some of them: Albert Einstein, David Bohm, Thomas Edison, Nikola Tesla, and others.
This is so great and wild and fantastic. And I know there's been a lot of people in the past couple of years who've asked me, what's the latest on the SoulPhone? What's the latest on the SoulPhone? And before we get into the latest on the SoulPhone, I think maybe we had talked about this the last time we spoke, but I'm just reminded of those two brothers that had a dream of creating a flying machine, Wilbur and Orville, and how back in the day, people thought they were crazy. It's never going to work. All of those things. And these were obviously the founding fathers of the aircraft. But now I was just on a flight not too long ago, and every time I take off, Mark, I'm thinking, thank you, Wilbur and Orville, for having a dream. And now we just take it for granted. So wherever we're at on planet Earth with the team and the SoulPhone, I just ask people to realize that, I believe beyond a shadow of a doubt that it's not too far away that we will be able to connect with our loved ones in just the convenience of our handheld device. But, don't listen to the little voice that says things are impossible, because look at the things we take for granted now. And even you mentioned Edison, the light bulb. Many people laughed at him and he failed 1,000 times. And now look what we have. So with that, just for all of us to be excited, really be excited at what's probably happening and what's possible in the future. So that being said, what's the latest, or what's happening, or what is the SoulPhone? We can even start with that. Or what
sure.
will it be?
First of all, that's a very apt analogy. Excuse me. This area is really full right now of something in the air that is choking me up. I apologize.
That's okay.
Yes, your Wright brothers metaphor is an apt one. We've searched into some of the writings by Orville and Wilbur, and they wrote after I think it was 1908, their first flight only lasted 12 seconds and crashed. But one of them wrote, for those 5 of us who were there on that day, we knew that human flight was possible.
Right.
And likewise with the SoulPhone, we now know, and I'll get into details in a moment, that first of all, this work has shown scientifically that life continues after bodily death. And secondly, that these people who have dropped their body can communicate. Now, is it a commercializable device you can go to your store and buy? Not yet. But as you say, Alexander Graham Bell patented the telephone in 1876. Well, in 1960, I was 7 years old. We had a party line. It was a 4-number dial. I remember getting on the phone, trying to call somebody. You'd like, clear your throat so whoever's on the line would hang up. And it was until the late 1990s that the first mobile phone existed. And it was huge. Yes. You had to be a weightlifter around. You need to understand that this kind of technology takes time to develop. So, first of all, the SoulPhone is an umbrella term for 4 anticipated devices. And the first is working very well, and that's called the Soul Switch. That's a binary indicator, meaning it allows yes, no answers from those in spirit. And the soul switch is not perceived as being a commercializable device. It would kind of be like a Ouija board, only very accurate, but we don't really anticipate going down that road. With the soul switch, again, we have been able to show that with multiple studies, thousands of trials, highly statistical significance, data analysis, etc., been able to show scientifically that the presence of spirit, that they are present. And further, their communication. For example, one way is using what we call the personal identification test. And I say we because I've actually been involved in a lot of this research over the last 3 years. And the personal identification test being a series of questions. So, for example, if I were in spirit, the question would be to me, is your first name Mark? Yes. Is your last name Champlain? The answer should be no. Did we have a dog named Snoopy when I was a kid? Yes. And so on. A series of questions that could be verified, which give a high degree of certainty that who we are dealing with. Secondly, what's called the cognitive understanding test, and this is done for the most part with a series of slides. And keep in mind, this has all been done in different centers, replicated, all computer automated, because Dr. Schwartz, being such a serious scientist, wanted to address any conceivable criticism. For example, the observer bias, that is the effect of the experimenter's consciousness on the outcome. So some of the experiments have been run in the middle of the night, the time selected by a random time generator. The computer starts the experiment in the middle of the night when everybody is asleep, so no one's consciousness would know when it started or what's going on. And yet the results are the same as when we're physically present in the room. So this cognitive understanding test then shows a series of slides. For example, using photos of let's say a mother wants to interact with her child who's passed. Slides would be loaded up, and the question would be, was this us together when you were a little boy? And if it was, the answer should be yes. But if the photo was of strangers, the answer should be no. Then another one, is this a picture of our dog we had, when we lived in a certain city? Yes or no. Is this a birthday party that occurred before you changed worlds? Yes or no. So again, a way to be sure who you're dealing with, to be sure that they are alive and well, and really most touching to know that they are still present. They still want to be part of the family. They're aware of what's going on. They're still in contact.
Mark, how do they flip the switch? I'm sure they have to manipulate energy, and I can't imagine it's an actual switch, like a light switch, but can I assume they use their energy to somehow get the information, the yes or the no, in the computer?
Yeah, there are actually two different switches right now, and we're kind of like you. There are two race cars that are leading the race, and so we're betting on both of them to see which one turns out to be the very best. But in both cases, yes, the post-material persons, the people who have passed on, are able to signal their presence. So, whether you could say it's their energy or they're touching with their hands depends on whether you're looking at the quantum physics, are things particles formed or waves, pure energy. But the experiments so far indicate that they can be just as physical as we. They have physicality as measured by the diminished time of photons passing from one area to another when they put their hand through it, the motion detected when they put their hand in an enclosed area and air motion is detected. So that's why we say post-material persons. They're not just airy, gauzy balls of energy. They can be, but they also can be quite physical, and from what we've gathered, enjoy doing that sometimes.
I would think so, definitely. And even some of the great mediums that we both know and love that work on behalf of those in the spirit world, they're still people. They are still people. They have their personalities, and to
Yes.
love and
Yes, and some of
respect
the
them.
information is that they very easily can bilocate, and we need a different word because in one conversation with Edison, Einstein, and Tesla, we were like auctioneers. Said, can you indeed enjoy simultaneous realities? And they said, oh yes. I said, so more than one place at a time? Yeah. 10? Yeah. 20? Yeah. And at that point, Gary said, now wait a minute. Are you saying to me that you can be in 20 different places at the same time having different interactions? Yes. And then it turned out they said even 50 and maybe 100 sometimes. So how cool would that be? And by the way, one of the I guess take home messages of that is when people try to interact with their loved ones who have passed on, it's not like we're interfering with their other business. They can do more than one thing at a time.
That's good news.
Mm-hmm.
This is very exciting. So that's the soul switch, which must be really amazing to just even be part of getting those answers, even having a conversation with Edison, Einstein, and Tesla. Like, no big deal. Oh, wow. What's the next of the 4 categories?
Yeah, first of all, we say right now the Soul Switch is a stage 2 prototype. It works about 90% of the time, 80 to 90, and we say that the other 10 or 20% is not that they're messing up, it's just the limits of the technology. And the next goal is to create the stage 3 prototype. However, that will require a full-time software programmer, full-time electrical engineer, a clean room, probably a $2 million budget to finalize that. And we have a couple people who are interested. We've been talking to, but if any people have investment capabilities and interest, contact us. Dr. Schwartz thinks that after the funding is in place and the equipment and so on, that will take about a year then to have the stage 3, and that will be a practically working device. That will then allow us to move into the second device, which is called the Soul Keyboard. So if you look at a keyboard in front of you, it's about 43 switches. And for example, if you push the L key, that's a yes for the L, the no for everything else. And the first soul switch then can be incorporated into a soul keyboard. Dr. Schwartz anticipates it'll be about 4 foot wide, 3 foot deep, but that will allow then texting and typing with those in another dimension.
Pretty great.
Yeah, by the way, we had a session through one of the top mediums being able to ask questions of people like Tesla and Einstein. And I asked, when we have a device and the Soul Keyboard would function for this, that allows sufficient quantity and quality of information to pass through, would you all be willing to give webinars addressing our toughest challenges and biggest problems? And the medium started laughing, and she said, they're pushing each other out of the way to get first in line. So indications are there's a huge amount of interest on, quote, the other side for helping us here on our planet. So keep hope alive, people. The third device then, after we have that Soul Keyboard, and by the way, that will allow so much more information from the A team and really expedite creation of the other devices. The third then being called Soul Voice, which would be like what each other, and then Soul Video, like teleconferencing, whether it's Zoom, Skype, FaceTime, being able to see and hear.
Very exciting. I'm just envisioning that world, and probably the not too distant future, that's possible.
It is, and just the knowledge that's on the way has helped many people. I've actually had 3 emails from people who were suicidal, and they said, I had just about had living on Earth, because how it's difficult for people who are partially awakened with all the craziness that goes on our planet. And they said, I was really considering moving on. And then I heard about the SoulPhone, and I thought, I want to stick around and see how this ends up. And then, of course, numerous bereaved parents who are journeying toward being shining light parents are so very excited that in addition to visitations with mediums and so on, they will at some point be able to visit in a much more developed way.
Oh, I think it's really great. And just how you brought up the cell phone or the mobile phone, back in the day, it was this big, heavy, clunky thing. And now we just hold this device in our hand that we can get almost all the information in the universe in less than a second. And it takes money. I mean, I think a lot of us working in the afterlife field just do this out of our own funds. And I know there's been donations and things to the SoulPhone Foundation, but it takes that, and it takes equipment, and it takes these computers. And I can't even imagine the device with photons and all those kind of things. But it also takes these minds that can get on board to help with it. I think probably when the cell phone first came out and more minds got involved, we saw the growth exponentially to what we have today in our hands. Can't even imagine what the future holds in that kind of technology. So it does take time, takes money, takes effort, takes the right people. But to get these words out that this is actually happening on the planet right now, it is so comforting to people. And that's one of the reasons I have such a passion about sharing these interviews. I never know which topic is going to land with what human being that will give them hope, give them comfort. And like you say, there's been plenty of suicides prevented, and give people the opportunity to breathe again. So important.
Yes, and especially, the proving that there's an afterlife has been near and dear to my heart for many years, since I was working with these dying people as a youth. But now, for the first time in 2019, we can say we now have definitive scientific demonstration that life continues after bodily death, which we could never state legitimately before, but now we can based on the data.
Where would you recommend people go, Mark, online? Would it be soulphone.org to find out more? Because obviously in an hour interview, you're not going to give all the details and be able to do that. But for people that want to explore more, I know you also have Greater Reality Living and Soul Proof.
Yeah, soulphone.org is a great way to start to learn more about it, to see the updates and so on. But Dr. Schwartz, by the way, is this a pack of crows just appeared outside my window? Let me close my window. Are you picking this up?
No, that's kind of cool,
okay,
though.
Well, if you're not picking it up, okay. If you're not picking it up, don't worry. I think they're excited. But Dr. Schwartz and I realized 3 years ago that it would be advantageous to have first a book, but also groups to help people adjust to this paradigm shift. I mean, it's huge to really know for sure. In other words, it's one thing where religions talk about it. It's another thing where evidence indicates, but now to say scientific demonstration of it. And so we wrote the book, Greater Reality Living, in which we lay out all the evidence, clinical, scientific, and based on firsthand experience. And then what we call the LIVES formula. And just briefly, LIVES is an acronym for L, learn the evidence that clearly shows we're forever being. I, internalize this great news so people don't just have a dry intellectual knowing that that fades when time gets tough, but a deep internalized knowing that serves them. It's like building your house on granite instead of shifting sand, that serves them when they're dying, when a loved one passes, etc. The V stands for vitalize yourself holistically, so that people have the energy, the balance, the vitality they need to brighten the corner where they are, to demonstrate this. Okay, well, Oprah says, when we know better, we do better. All right, well, when we know that we're eternal beings and that we're all interconnected, how does that shape the way we interact with each other, treat one another, and so on? Mobilize, do what we can to make the world a better place. The E stands for enjoy the many benefits, like knowing there's nothing to fear. Yeah, we dropped the body, but that turns out to be much less than 1% of who and what we are. And same way, we couldn't lose loved ones if we tried. We are so inextricably interconnected, people and pets. And then finally, the S stands for serve others and make the world a better place. So we wanted to share this formula, and then each chapter has lots of information, strategies, resources, so people can use it. We've also started greater reality living groups. I think we have 3 or 4 functioning now in the U.S. and Canada. I mean, we just got started. The first of the year, we'll start online greater reality living groups, because we had heard from so many people over the years, there's no one I can talk to about these things. If I told my family and friends, they'd think I was kooky. Well, guess what? We must all be kooky, because it turns out so many of us have had after-death communications or various spiritually transformative experiences. So these greater reality living groups, then, being safe places, inclusive, respectful of diversity, and so on, where people can learn this information. We have videos and facilitator managers. We have a whole team of 28 people working for the foundation, project managers, who are forming these groups where people can learn this information, discuss it, share their own personal experiences, and then look at how can they take action in their community to make things better.
Really good. I know for myself, my life has improved. I don't even know how many times over, embracing the fact that we don't die. It's also our life is for a purpose. I've gone after some dreams that have been forgotten about. I've been courageous in the face of fear, things I probably wouldn't have normally done, but embracing this greater reality living, as you talk about it, is something that I'm living my best life. And it all stemmed out of, some of the worst times that have happened, death of my dad, death of my grandmother. And it's really exciting to me that you now have greater reality groups. And I'd love to be your partner with sharing that and greater reality living with the world. It sounded.
Wow. Well, thank you for that, Sandra. Yes, people can visit greaterrealityliving.com. There are links and tabs on starting a group, joining a group. It's all very well set up. Yeah, as you say, when we really know who we are, it's a game changer. And that doesn't mean life's perfect. For example, when a loved one passes on, it doesn't take away all the sadness or pain, but it definitely lightens it. It's the difference between saying goodbye to someone knowing that we'll never see them again versus saying, see you later.
Mm-hmm. And it's a see you later. It's like they went on a vacation first and you're going to meet them at the destination, but you've got some work to do before you get on the airplane.
Yes.
That's what I say. How can someone get a copy of the Greater Reality Living book?
Well, if they Google it, it's available through Amazon, of course, isn't everything?
Yeah, everything.
They can buy it off my website, soulproof.com, as well as, while I'm mentioning soulproof.com, I just hit article number 50 on it. Over the years, I've created articles with holistic solutions for the biggest questions and problems people encounter when a loved one passes, when a loved one dies by suicide. And actually, I should clean up my language like the title say. We say, when the body of a loved one dies by suicide, because we want to be very clear, your loved one didn't die, just the body did. And that's such a huge distinction. And we need to upgrade our language so that our brains really understand that. An article for people who are sensitive and empathic, which is very common, holistic health information, et cetera, all sorts of techniques. So those are all free articles at soulproof.com. Also, numerous radio shows I had over the years with people like Wayne Dyer, Brian Weiss, Raymond Moody, Michael Newton, Anita Moore, Johnny Carolyn Mason, just top names discussing these various topics. Who am I? Why am I here? What happens after I die? How can I identify my mission, etc.? So these are all free resources at soulproof.com for your listeners.
Thank you for that. It's great to be able to share, because there's always so much more. And some of those folks that you talked about, I may never interview, and to have those conversations out there, because I wasn't having a bad day before you and I got on this conversation, Mark, but I wouldn't say it was a great day. But something inside me said, after this conversation, it'll be a great day. So we all need resources to plug us back into this greater reality and remind us of who we are. So thank you for having all those resources at soulproof.com.
My pleasure. And it gets better than that. The beginning of next year, we will start what are called SEED events, SEED being an acronym for SoulPhone, Education, Ethics, and Demonstration. And just a side note, the ethics part comes in. We are very cognizant of the potential downsides of this communication technology. When the cell phone and computer industry started, I don't know how much attention they paid to the potential abuses. And now, for example, people getting hacked, identity theft, and so on through these technological devices. Well, Dr. Schwartz, being the very caring person he is, he said, I can't open Pandora's box without prudent safeguards in place. And so we want people to be clear from the beginning. And even when the devices are ready, it won't be like something you can go buy at a store. They will be at centers initially, cell phone centers, where people can use the technology, but where there will be safeguards in place, protection, and so on. Also, counseling. I mean, you can imagine if a person, after a meaningful visit, that's going to be life-changing for them. So they may need to talk for a while and some counseling. So we're thinking all this through. So that's the ethics part. These SEED events then will start February 8th, actually, in Tampa, Florida. We'll give 3 on West Coast, Florida in February, 3 on the East Coast in March, and then just move on up throughout the year. So this time of year, we may be in your backyard, Baltimore and Boston and so on, New York, and give these demonstrations because, as the saying goes, seeing is believing. This will be a full day event. First, Dr. Schwartz will present. Now, he and his wife, Rhonda, who's one of the evidential mediums, will be presenting by Zoom. They'll be ensconced in the research at the University of Arizona, so they're not going to travel around the country. But first, Dr. Schwartz will present on the science behind all this on the SoulPhone. Rhonda, being she calls herself a research medium. In other words, she doesn't do readings for people. All of her work is with the A team, bringing through information for the various researchers. She will speak about evidential mediums, what those are, and then also about the A team, some of the background news and some of what they bring through, snippets that she has gathered over the years about what their life is like now. I will present about the greater reality living, That is, how might we live differently once we know without a doubt that we're eternal beings, and the various benefits of all of this. Then we will move into the demonstration mode. First of all, showing the equipment for the first time ever to the public, and showing first what does it look like when there's baseline, because all of these experiments have what we call no participant controls. In other words, we need to have control groups. What happens when no one's touching the equipment, when no one's in the room, human or post-material? And it's pretty much like a flatline EKG. The data hovers along the x-axis, pretty much not much. I mean, it's going to pick up some electromagnetic fields from fluorescent lights and 110 outlets, what we call background noise. Then we will have an attendee from the audience come up and touch whichever device we're using and show what is the impact of their physicality, their energy. And it's huge for humans. And that will be visible light, and it'll be a big overhead screen so you can see the change in the light patterns. Also, graphs are produced instantaneously, huge graphs showing the difference between a yes and no answer, and then the statistical significance is computed again instantaneously. The software for all this is upgraded monthly, and it's amazing. It's magical. Then one of the A team will come on and touch the devices, and then we'll see the effect of their input. Now, and this is fascinating to me. A few years ago, Dr. Schwartz said on an average, a post-material person's signal was about 1,000th that of a human. Yeah, which is very small, but it was still very highly statistical significant versus a baseline control. Mm-hmm. Well, then, about a year ago, he started saying they are averaging 100th now, which is 10 times better than what they were doing. In our last round of experiments, which took about 2 months to run, thousands and thousands of sessions, their energy was 7% of what a human's is. Well, that's 7 times what they were doing when it was 1 out of 100. But the part that really blows my mind is about a month ago, a Hollywood videography team came to the lab at Tucson to prepare for a series of documentaries about the SoulPhone. And the producer is directing everything. The videographer is taking 2.5 hours of footage. The A team member for that is a woman named Susie Smith, who passed in 2001, but she and Gary were friends before she passed on. Susie wrote 30 books on psychic, medium, and afterlife topics. Susie Smith, S-U-S-Y. She lived to almost age 90. She was wheelchair bound for the last couple of decades of her life. And before she passed, one of her sayings was, "I can't wait to die so I can come back and prove no one really dies."
That's
you
great.
May have heard a saying like that before.
Yes. That's great.
Well, so she was chosen to be the A team member for this demonstration that was being professionally filmed. She knocked it out of the park. She achieved 40% of what the human effect is. 40%, 2/5 of what a human does. So we've gone from 1,000th to 40%. And Gary said, yeah, no wonder. She's been waiting all these years, about 20 years, to show us that no one really dies. She just did it, with whatever the saying, in spades.
Mm-hmm. That's incredible.
Yeah, so those will be the seed events, and then there'll be a wrap-up. Dr. Schwartz will come back in and answer questions. We'll talk about the impact of this. So we'll be doing this on weekends. I have a team of event planners who will be helping set them up. And those public demonstrations then should really, launch this. Media being present, people really getting, and we're so excited about between that, the greater reality living groups, seeing a change in our lifetime, a metamorphosis as more and more people, we call them the 15 percenters. And I derived that term from the work of Michael Newton, founder of Life Between Lives therapy. Dr. Newton and he has about 25 trained therapists, have conducted 35,000 Life Between Lives sessions in something like 23 countries. So they've mapped out very well that on average, about 85% of people on earth are what they call beginner souls. And there's no judgment involved. It's just how many times they've been around the block and how much they've learned. Another 12 or 13% would be considered intermediate souls, and then 2 to 3% advanced. And so I'm fairly good at math. I put together those intermediate and advanced numbers and came up with 15%. So we're not going to reach everyone, as we were talking before we started the interview. There are skeptics, there are closed-minded people, there are people who are imbalanced, there are people who are in so much pain that they lash out and criticize. And so we know we're not going to touch everyone, and we know we're going to have the skeptics, but if even a half of the 15 percenters would mobilize and brighten the corner where they are, do what they came here to do, share their greatest gifts, the changes in our world would be unbelievably powerful and quick, not to mention all the impact from the many near-death experiencers, the many bereaved parents who are choosing to transmute their pain into service. We have some really exciting changes starting to kick in now.
Oh, it's just tremendous. How do we find out about the upcoming SEED events? I know you said the first one's February 2020. Would we find that on soulphone.org?
Yes, and also greaterrealityliving.com, and also people who sign up for our free newsletters, whether it's the soulproof.com newsletter or the one from the two websites we just mentioned, will receive updates about when these events are. We're 5 months out.
The time will go by very quickly, and there'll be more and more. This is really just fascinating. Fascinating. And you mentioned that people really didn't know the ramifications when the computer came out and having the ethics. I was looking at that in a different way. People probably didn't realize that some people would spend their whole lives on computers. I mean, there's some children that are locked up just on playing games 24/7. And I think with the future being the SoulPhone and this technology, I like the idea of it being in a place where you could give counseling that's like if you go to a medium for the very first time and you get some information, people can very easily want to be addicted to seeing that medium every day to hear the messages from their loved one, not realizing that our lives are for a purpose. And it's great to have as a resource that they're there and that comfort through grief and helping live our life. But we don't want people addicted to getting in touch with their loved one, if that makes sense.
Sure. Well, different people are different states, and those who are more evolved and have more certainty, they see the signs and they say, okay, thanks for checking in, but I've got a lot to do while I'm here. I'm on Earth for a reason. And then others, for whatever reason, want to check in more fully, more frequently. And that's the way, by the way, why I created what's called the Facilitated After Death Contact Session. It's article number 9 at soulproof.com, and it talks about a number of practical things people can do to stack the deck. As you know, after-death communications occur spontaneously. They're wonderful blessings when they happen. And so I looked at how can we increase the chances of having those, and then create a deep relaxation/hypnosis session so people could enjoy the presence of their loved ones. I did this at AREI with the Helping Parents Heal conference, and many people have experienced their loved ones touching their hair, holding their hand, hugging them, and so on, which is what's really happening. But it's just so often we're stuck in our analytical brain that we don't perceive what's happening right in front of us.
Is that a session somebody would do with you, or is it something that's recorded?
That's recorded so that people can use it. It's $15,
What a deal. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I know. Article number 9 at soulproof.com, and then under shop they can buy that facilitated after death contact session. Yeah, then people can share it with others. They can use it repeatedly, and what we've found is that it's kind of like you remember the movie Ghost, of course,
yes,
where Demi Moore is on one side of the door and doesn't believe that her boyfriend Patrick Swayze is still alive. Whoopi Goldberg's on the other side saying, "He's right beside you," and Patrick says, "Float the penny in the air." And that was her moment of awakening, her spiritually transformative experience where she saw the light, just like near-death experiences have. She realized, well, likewise, when people have these experiences like the facilitated ADC contact, and they have a couple of times, oh my God, I could feel her presence. She touched me, I could see her in my mind's eye. I could hear her voice. Then that can generalize over time. So it becomes more of a person's normative consciousness. And then after a while, they don't need mediums. They don't need techniques. That just becomes part of their reality. And that's why we use the term the greater reality, because the average human only perceives much less than 1% of all that exists.
Oh, that's good news. Frequently when we're on the show, and I do talk to mediums, and as great as having an evidential reading is, because I believe it's fantastic, to also know, though, that our loved one is with us. It's not only when you see that person or when you talk to them on the phone that your loved one comes in. And it's really great to hear that they can be many places at once. I think experiments have happened that the same loved one has come through mediums to two separate siblings at the same time in two separate places. And your loved one is with you. And so to be able to help facilitate for $15, I actually think it's less than that. I think it's $14.99, a facilitated after death contact that you or me can do on our own in the privacy of our own home, where we can share our emotions and be free with tears or whatever that may be. And that love, I think that's really an awesome gift to people to do this ourselves.
Yes. Well, I owe credit to Dr. Brian Wise, Dr. Raymond Moody, and also Dr. Ken Ring, all of whom trained me over the years with different techniques. And then I synthesized those and added some more to come up with these. By the way, for people who have some trouble believing about this bilocation, that indeed those in spirit, and probably us as well, can be in more than one place at a time, I like the analogy of electrical devices. In other words, right now I can see the electrical wire coming through the air into our house. Then that stream of energy, electricity, but then that can activate numerous electrical devices inside the house. TV, lights, radio, this laptop simultaneously. Well, likewise, we are beings of energy consciousness, and that can then split off, experience different parts of this huge, vast life that exists at the same time without diminishing the experience. And that's also comforting for people to know that, well, going back to Michael Newton, who I just consider such a great pioneer and teacher, author
Yes.
of Journey of Souls and Destiny of Souls. He was a guest on my show. Just what a mind. He changed worlds a few years ago. Well, he said that his understanding was, again, based on his many thousands of cases, that the average human uses about 20% of their energy while they're visiting Earth. Well, that leaves a lot of other energy that can be then perceiving the greater reality, learning, growing, enjoying, serving in other ways, in other forms. And then also that part of our energy never leaves home, is with God, is with our soulmates and so on. So this is one tool I use to help comfort people who are just really going through a tough time. I've been working in the last week with a suicidal woman whose husband just came in with no warning and just said, "I'm leaving." And she thought everything was fine. They've been together for decades, and she's just so torn up.
Sure.
Understandably. And I worked with her under hypnosis to help her understand, okay, I know this is going on right now, this deep, deep pain, but could it be that at the same time, you and he, likely soulmates, are together in another realm, and this was set up for good reasons, which is like Buddha said, there's only two reasons, growth or service. And those words can feel empty when you just talk about it, but when she went deeply and then experienced, and she came out, she was crying, but with joy, she said, I remember we're teammates. We came into this together, and that's going to help me get through the pain. So this is the things we're talking about have immense practical value for our day-to-day optimal living.
Would you relate that to suffering? Because I believe suffering can help us get on our spiritual path. And I've never heard that Buddha quote about growth or service. I dig that. But can you talk a little bit about suffering and the greater reality?
Sure. This is why it's so important to know who we are. So if this time on earth is all there is, life certainly seems to be unfair, cruel, painful, short. It's like there can't be a God, and if there is, pretty crummy one. But when we realize that there's much more to life than meets the eye, when we see more of the big picture, when we're looking at life through even a $50 size opening instead of a little pinhole that most of us are looking through, we realize the kinds of things that surface again and again, whether it's from near-death experience reports, evidential mediums, etc. And that is, we each are eternal beings. We each are one with the one and part of Source right now. We have never-ending connections with our loved ones, that we each come here in this time and place for important reasons, and much, much more. All right, so a person, whether they're, to the degree a person realizes the things I just said, they can understand why then a soul may choose to come to Earth and choose the possibility of suffering. Not that it's totally set in stone, otherwise that'd be determinism, and why bother? But the potential, and this is part of what Rob Schwartz and others have dealt with, and I have a pre-birth planning session also under hypnosis. But souls, knowing that they have forever, forever is a long, long time, say, okay, yeah, I'll go to Earth for a blink of an eye, for that's truly what 100 years is in a span of eternity, and I'll be paralyzed from the neck down. Why? Because it will help that person grow so much, perhaps appreciating the little things in life more, perhaps being more patient. Also, sometimes intermediate or advanced souls will agree to come to Earth as one of their, 100 things that they're doing at the same time, to be sick, to be ill, so that younger souls can practice being caregivers. It's all about love, and the love is so immense that when we feel just a little of that, we're turned on. We're on the team. We're in the groove, so to speak. And so that's why souls then would choose the possibility, whether it's a child passing early, a loved one dying, the breakup of a relationship, financial loss. I've had so many of these things, but I wouldn't change it all. It's like the Garth Brooks song. I could have missed the pain, but I would have missed the dance.
Oh.
And it's so well worth the price. And then there's that blink of an eye when everything seems separate and painful and hopeless. And then we get back home, we're like, oh, I forgot again. It sucked me in again. But eventually, after going through this again and again, we get to the point where like, okay, I can do this. I've been through tough times before. I've been through that valley of the shadow of death. I know I'm going to get back to the mountain, and I'm going to lean on people. I know there are others who want to help me. And I'm even going to look for the blessings as I heal and transform from this one.
And there are blessings, and probably 99% of the time you can't see it while you're suffering, but a year in the future, I can't tell you, even before I wrote my book, I'd sit next to somebody on the airplane, and the words that I was able to share, or just even being able to listen, was just what somebody needed. So our suffering and our journey can really help and serve others. No doubt about it. Mark, your audios I'm very excited about, because I really didn't realize that they were in there until I started doing some research. So the facilitated after-death contact, that's great. Just mentioning the pre-birth planning, because wouldn't it be great to know what we've come here for? Past life regression, and especially heal and transform your suffering, and you have even more than that. So those are all on soulproof.com, correct? Under shop, I think?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Can people...
Well, that's why I've created these, because so many people need the tools, and the therapists don't have time to reach the masses, and the masses, can't afford the couple $100 it takes to spend 2 hours one-on-one. So yeah, these are every bit as powerful as having a one-on-one session at a fraction of the price.
And you're fabulous, and you've been trained by the best. So some of the people that you've worked with are just spectacular. Can people still contact you and have sessions with you personally?
I actually don't have the time now, and that's why I've created these sessions. But I do group sessions at various conferences.
Excellent.
So maybe somebody named Sandra will invite me to one of hers next year, and we can do some of these as a group.
I think that's a plan. You're so funny. And that's a definite. And I love you. I love to share you, and I'm so grateful. Mark, we just have a few minutes left. Are there anything else you'd like to share, or something I should have asked you that I haven't, or if you just want to reach in for some words of inspiration, here's the time.
Sure. Well, I'd like to share something that happened in the February of 2018. I was at the home of Dr. Gary and Rhonda Schwartz. They were gifting me a session with the A-team, the ability to ask a number of questions of the A-team. And it was the first time they had been asked anything that was of a non-technological nature. So I had thought for weeks, oh my God, what would I ask? Because this is, the cream of the crop of people who lived on Earth. Well, my first question was, how can we create world peace? How can we have harmony on our planet? And Albert answered through Rhonda, and this is discussed in our book, Greater Reality Living. He said, wow, that's a tough one. I noticed that things are really no better than when I was on Earth. The causes of disharmony and the solutions needed for them are many. And he said, all I can tell you is listen to your inner heart's calling, do what you're most passionate about, and know that that's your contribution. Frankly, I was a little disappointed. I thought, okay, you're Albert Einstein, for God's sake. Plus, you've dropped your filtration, limiting filtration of your brain. I thought you'd come up with something more than that, but I moved on to my second one. I said, okay, Dr. Schwartz and I are getting ready to publish our book, Greater Reality Living. Is there anything we've missed in it? And Rhonda said, well, Mark, you have to realize that even though they're seeing more of the greater reality than we on Earth, they're not omniscient. And we haven't talked to them about the book. We're always talking about how SoulPhone. Can you just give them an overview? So I did the LIFE formula, what I just mentioned earlier. Learn the evidence, internalize this great news, vitalize yourself, enjoy the benefits, and serve others and make the world a better place. And when I went over that brief overview of the book, Einstein shouted through Rhonda, "That's it. You just answered your first question."
That's great.
And it took me a moment to realize what was being said, but when I did, I had goosebumps on top of goosebumps. If I had hair on top of my head, it would have been standing straight up. And they said, what you just went over is sufficient to help change the world. They said, you have covered all the bases. You just needed to get out there. And David Bohm, who was a Princeton mathematician and quantum physicist, colleague of Einstein, said, run, don't walk. Share this with as many people as possible, as quickly and boldly as you can. And he said, and don't be concerned about critics. We had them when we were on Earth. You're going to have them definitely. Just let their uninformed, unfair attacks run off your back like water off a duck's back. And that jazzed us, needless to say, that we were on the right track. And that's why I really appreciate getting the word out to your listeners about the Greater Reality Living book, the groups, the SoulPhone technology that can help people's biggest problems and also mobilize them to, you said something earlier when you were talking about you had courage when faced with obstacles. It was a beautiful way you put it. Well, likewise, this knowledge and these groups and this support can be the key that triggers people to say, okay, you know what? I'm going to shake off this feeling of hopelessness, this inertia, and I am going to do what I can, even if it's a little bit.
It's really good advice. I'm excited to read Greater Reality Living. I haven't read it yet, and now with everything you've told me is in there, it's very exciting. Very exciting. Well, Mark, thank you so much for being our guest today.
Well, thank you for all you do and for sharing this information with others, Sandra.
I love it. I'm a human being too, and I knew this would be a great conversation. And I know that having a support system in place, whether it's a Greater Reality Living group or part of even an online group, it all makes a difference. And having these episodes make a difference to me and others. So I am grateful that I get to share you and Dr. Schwartz and everything that you're up to. And the A-Team. Let's have a shout out to the A-Team. That's a great experience that you had. Ask them anything.
Yes. And by the way, they recently said, we just want you to know that there are hundreds more like us who are waiting in the wings when the time is right for us to come forward and help. So just another bit of information to help those of us on Earth keep hope alive, do all we can, know that we're not alone.
No. And there's so many great people doing great things, and I feel really honored and privileged to be able to not just interview great people like yourself, Mark, but to be able to say, you know what, I could introduce this one to this one. I even have a vision of putting together a site someday of all these groups that are going on in the world and what they're doing that are all tied in with afterlife and having a greater life, so that's a vision of connection and that we're all really interested in the same thing. So being able to connect people. So we're not just on the internet, we can actually meet for a cup of coffee or something like that and have people in our communities and have these support groups. So I'll definitely help share Greater Reality Living and the groups that are forming. And just for our listener, obviously we've been talking to the fabulous Dr. Mark Pitstick, but Greater Reality Living is the book that we've been talking about. But you can find out so much more at greaterrealityliving.com, soulphone.org, and soulproof.com. Even to watch the documentary Soul Proof is a great thing. And as a community, I invite if you're a Facebook user, we have We Don't Die Listeners Group, which is now 5,000 fabulous people that we talk about these subjects, and people share great books that they've read. And it's just a really good place to share these topics. And also at WeDon'tDieRadio.com, you can find all the past episodes, now well over 300. And there's a little pop-up screen that comes up that says join the Insiders Club. And that's my email list. And I don't send you too many emails, but something you get as a gift. It says read a few free chapters of my book. Well, here's the secret. It's the whole book. I want to give you everything I know about the afterlife and grief support and living life. And there's also a very healing audio called How to Survive Grief. That's a free download as part of that. And I think that's probably it. So in closing, I've really been left with this growth or service quote. I'm going to have to find that, Mark, what exactly that quote is, or maybe you could send it to me. And also to listen to your heart's calling and do what you're passionate about. So many people are looking for the answer. And I think the answer is within. Just, what are those things that you're already doing that make you happy? And what are the dreams you've had? And that's perfect. And anytime you can lend an ear to someone, be a listener, and be of service, I think that truly is the biggest gift we can do. So in closing, my name is Sandra Champlain, always so happy to be your host on We Don't Die Radio. And I do believe that life is an education for the soul and that your life here on earth is important. So I hope you're leaving this conversation with as big a smile as I have right now. And I want to thank you for listening, and we'll see you soon.